turnout. I guess it's time to get started now. I guess I can't say I'm going to be brief because I get in trouble for saying that. But my name is Paul Hiradakis. I'm a professor in the School of Communication Studies. I know many of you have been to past Global Issues Forums, but for those of you who haven't, the Global Issues Forums that we hold each year and generally each semester were designed in part as part of our global communication program. Students in the School of Communication Studies can get bachelor's and master's degrees in with their emphasis in global communication. And the Global Issues Forum was formed as part of that program. The purpose of each of these Global Issues Forum is really simply to bring greater awareness to issues of significant global interest and concern that really oftentimes are being understudied in the media, and particularly hopefully to stimulate informed public discussion about these issues. Before introducing our speaker tonight, though, there are a couple groups that I have to acknowledge. First is Linda Robertson and the Gerald H. Reed Center for International and Intercultural Education, who co-sponsors and with the School of Communication Studies and co-hosts the forum with us. Obviously, I have to thank the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting for making available to us journalists reporting from around the world on these issues of significant interest. I also want to thank, and I don't know where she went, but I also want to thank Margaret Garman in the School of Communication Studies, who basically coordinated this event, put all the details together. If it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be here tonight. And I just wanted to say, if you're interested in any of the future Global Issues Forums, the ones that we'll have next semester or semesters after that, there's actually a sign-up sheet out front if you'd like to leave your name and email, and we can email you information about it. Or you can visit the School of Communication Studies website and our Facebook or Instagram pages. But now, it's time to introduce our speaker. I'm very honored and privileged to have the opportunity to introduce tonight Emily Feldman. As you know from what we have seen, I'm sure, in the media, the ongoing movement of refugees from Syria and Iraq has become definitely the largest human migration of the 21st century. The largest really single human migration since the late 19th centuries, early 20th centuries, with large-scale migration from Europe to the United States. It's of great interest to governments worldwide. It's a focus of international media attention, but often the nuances behind this movement has escaped mainstream media attention, but not the attention of our speaker tonight, Emily Feldman. Ms. Feldman is currently an Istanbul-based Pulitzer Center journalist. She writes about the humanitarian crisis resulting from these conflicts in Iraq and Syria, with a special focus on women. For the last 2 years, she's been reporting on issues ranging from ISIS recruitment to the mass movement of refugees from the region, filing stories from Iraq, Turkey, the Balkans, and Western Europe for Mashable, and Al Jazeera America, among others. She's also a veteran reporter who's worked for NBC News in New York at their news desk. She's received her bachelor's degree from the University of Delaware, and her master's degree from City University of New York. She's also a New York native, hails from Long Island. We're very fortunate to have her here to share with you these issues that she's covered in this ongoing story, but particularly her take on it and her first-person insight on these issues. So please assist me in welcoming Emily Feldman.
Hello. First, I want to thank everyone who has hosted me here at Kent State University. It's my first time here, and I've been having so much fun visiting. I've visited a handful of classes, and it's been great for me. I used to be a teacher, and it's been a really long time since I've been in the classroom, so it's been really fun to engage with students, especially about the work that I've been doing lately from Turkey and the region. I am going to be talking about the refugee crisis tonight, and it's kind of a depressing topic, but I'm going to hopefully remember to highlight any of the brightness that I can so we don't all walk out of here really depressed. All right, is that working? Okay. So what I hope to do, this is a topic that's been in the news a lot lately, especially since the summer. We're seeing all sorts of headlines about a mass movement of people from Syria. They're trying to come to Europe. They're trying to come to the United States. And I hope that I can just pause for a minute, because sometimes when a story has been going on for so long, we forget how it even started. And I think it's important to go back and look at the story from the beginning, not step by step. It's been 4.5 years of war in Syria, so I don't want to go through every bit of detail, but I do think it's worthwhile to begin by just stepping back and looking at how did we get here, who are these people, and what does it mean for us, and why should we care being halfway around the world? So first I'll tell you just a little bit more about my reporting on the issue, because it's a huge issue and not, I haven't covered every single bit of it, so I'll tell you what I have done. So I moved to Turkey, which is, okay, you don't have a mouse here, but the big blue country in the middle there, that's Turkey. And I moved there in the summer of 2013. So the refugee crisis is being driven by the war in Syria. It's not, there are refugees coming from many other places, but the bulk are coming from Syria because of the war in Syria. So just to the south is Syria. So Turkey has sort of been like this epicenter of the refugee crisis. By the time I got there in 2013, it was very visible. So just walking down the street in Istanbul where I live, you could see people begging on the street. It was something that locals were noticing, okay, something is happening. I see a change happening in my city. So for me, first showing up there, it was it was the most accessible story and the first sort of story that I began to pursue. And it was really interesting, and I stuck with it. I continued reporting from all over Turkey on the crisis, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. In also 2013, refugees started pushing into Europe a little bit more than they had been before. And I traveled to Bulgaria, which is the first country right there, also in blue. It's a member of the EU, and it's the poorest country in the EU, and they really were not prepared to handle refugees, and they were trying to prevent refugees from coming, but I got there just before walls and fences started going up, and that was really depressing, actually, to see the conditions that refugees were living in there, and sort of the xenophobia that was spreading very rapidly there. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about each of these things. I just want to give a little bit of an overview. In 2014, the attention shifted to Iraq when ISIS moved into Iraq from Syria. And I traveled there to report on not only refugees, but people were internally displaced. So ISIS came into areas where people were living. They escaped, and now they're living, technically they're not refugees, they're internally displaced people, but they're living in refugee camps in Iraq. Now the story has shifted to Europe, so I've also looked at a lot of the boats that are coming. People are trying to get to Europe any way possible. And Germany, which is the one all the way up in the left corner, has become sort of a hot spot, and I was just there 2 weeks ago looking at what is happening there, what are the conditions. Supposedly this is like the final destination, and I think a lot of stories in the media were looking at or telling the story like, yes, we finally made it to Germany, everything's good now, and that's usually not the case. Actually, it's the beginning of a whole new, very difficult process. So I'll talk again a bit more about that later. So this is the general overview, and it's not comprehensive. There are refugee stories to be told all over the region. I haven't done reporting in Lebanon or Jordan, which are also big hotspots, but this is where I'm coming from. So we'll go from there. This picture is the one that seems to have gotten everybody's attention again. This is a little boy who was on a boat that was leaving Turkey and trying to get to Europe. He's from Syria, and his father survived, but his other family members, his mother died, he died, his brother died, and his body washed up on the shore, and this sort of became like an iconic picture. There's actually a more graphic one of him face down. He washed up on the beach, the water's lapping over him, and a photographer was there who captured this image. And it's a weird thing about media, but sometimes an image just sort of captures something and gets everyone's attention. The refugee crisis is not new. It's been going on for years, but all of a sudden, people saw this image and really, really reacted that, children are dying trying to come to Europe, and this is something we need to talk about. So I think a lot of media organizations sort of embraced the interest and all of a sudden ramped up the coverage of refugees again, even though I want to emphasize it's not a new thing. It's been going on for a really long time. So I don't want to bore you too much with statistics, but they're important just for like a starting point to look at the scale of this and where it's happening and what it's affecting. And then we can go into more fun, or not fun, but personal stories. So where are all these people coming from? This, I should point out, this is from the UN's Refugee Agency, and this data is old. It's from 2014, and it's changed. The numbers are bigger now, and also Iraq, which is way down there, is probably much higher on this chart because this is before ISIS came. So, but just to give you a sense, absolutely, unquestionably, the Syrian crisis, the war in Syria is driving this refugee crisis. Also, I think it's interesting to note that Afghanistan, we think a lot of times like, oh, like that's over. Like Afghanistan, we had a war there and it's gone, but the refugees are continuing to come. They represent some of the highest numbers of people who are trying to get to Europe and beyond. So there's that. Also, Iraq, like I said, is probably a lot higher up. But this is not refugees going to Europe. This is just global refugees. This is where they are going, or where they are right now. And again, this data is a little bit old. I cut off the numbers. You can't even see them anyway, but I'll just tell you that, what's that? Oh, no. What are we going to do now? Can we fix this? All right. In the meantime, Turkey is the number one hosting country in the world. There's more than 2 million refugees that are living in Turkey and waiting for whatever conflict they escaped to end so that they could go home. Let's see if we can. All right, in the meantime, I'll summarize the chart a little bit. Turkey's number one, and if you look at like number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the United States is not on the chart. Most of Europe is not on the chart. So even though I think it's very interesting that the headlines, especially in Europe, are screaming right now, oh my God, global refugee crisis, all these people coming into our country, it is nothing compared to what Turkey has already seen, what Jordan has already seen, what Lebanon has already seen. It's still significant. It's still definitely significant, but it's important just to keep the perspective that it's really, these are small numbers compared to what we're seeing in other countries. So I don't remember what my next slide is, so I'm gonna have to wait a second.
I'll go to your next.
Huh?
Damas.
Oh, okay. Okay, another thing I want to point out, since we're starting with a little bit of background, I think it's really important to remember, I want to talk now about the Syrian, like what happened in Syria. Why did this war start? How is it going on so long? What is driving people out of their homes? And why do they want to come to Europe, or why do they want to come to America? So to begin talking about that, I want to talk a little bit about the country of Syria. And something that really is important to keep in mind is that Syria is not like Afghanistan. It's not a country that has a history of decades of war. It's not a place that they had, really low literacy rates and dirt roads and stuff. It was a country that I might have liked to go on vacation to. It's a country with a really rich history. I spoke to a guy from the Red Cross recently who is trying to fix, obviously it's like a war zone right now, so he's trying to do emergency like water services and power services. And he said to me, because he had been in Syria, I actually had not been to Syria, so I don't know the background so much, but he said to me that it used to be, like he was there years ago, and he was like, this is a country that had pretty good infrastructure. This is a country that had good roads, decent power, decent whatever, and now it's a war zone. The literacy rate in Syria was something like 90%. It's an educated country. English was spoken. People who are university educated, a lot of them speak English. So we're not talking about a place that's super, super foreign. It's a place, like I said, that I might like to go and do a study abroad or go on vacation to. So this is the starting point. Slide. I had pictures actually, which I would love for you guys to see, because I grabbed some pictures off the web just to show you guys what it looked like before it was destroyed. Because I think with all these headlines now, even when I think of Syria, I think of like collapsed buildings and craters and war zones. Like you don't see like how pretty it was and how people on the streets and going to work. And I think it's important that we remember that this was a normal, functioning, place where millions of people lived and actually still do.
You have the ancient ruins.
What's that?
Ruins?
Yes.
Okay. Did you go over that?
No.
Okay. That's not going. Sorry.
Okay. I guess I can do it without. No. All right. I suppose I don't need it. All right, if we get the pictures, we can come back to it, but I'll talk a little bit about, okay, so what happened? There was this place that was relatively normal, a city or a country where, infrastructure was decent, education was decent, blah, blah, blah. How did we get to where we are right now? So being at Kent was actually sort of interesting for me as I'm thinking about this because of the history of Kent State. For those who haven't followed this issue, the whole war in Syria started by peaceful protests. People were out protesting against the government, which was a dangerous thing to do because the government there really didn't tolerate this sort of thing. But young people were inspired by protests that they saw elsewhere in the region and decided they were going to go out and they were going to go into the streets and protest. And the government did not like this, and eventually they grew bigger and bigger. They spread all around the country. People were just coming out into the streets to protest. And the government security forces shot live ammunition at protesters. So being here at Kent State, and I went on the May 4th tour, was interesting for me thinking about Syria, because it's something that seems so foreign, like, oh, how does a war start? You can't even imagine when you see what Syria looks like now. It's hard to imagine, how does something like this even begin? But this is how it begins, and in our country we've had a little taste of this sort of stuff, so I thought that was interesting. But this is how it started. So they fire live ammunition at protesters. Protesters die. Rather than retreat, the protesters get angrier and come out, and they're not going to back down. Well, the military is not going to back down. So now we have a problem, and it escalates, and it actually becomes a full-blown war when some people in the military were like, I can't do this. I'm not going to follow orders. I'm not going to fire on my own people. So they kind of switched sides a little bit. And now you have ex-military people. I mean, you could imagine it in the American context, like soldiers are given orders, they can't do this, they're going to switch sides. And now all of a sudden, they're trying to organize themselves. Maybe you have cops that they can recruit, and now you have armed people fighting armed people, and now we have war. So it's something that, a trigger a trigger can make this happen. And it escalated, and you could also imagine that not all of the protesters have the same idea of what they want. So maybe the common goal is we don't like this government, but I don't think you can't take an entire country and have everybody agree on the type of leader that they want. So what happens is that different groups start to form, and now each group has its own vision of what sort of country and future they want once this president is gone. So they have that very vague common goal. This guy has to go, but what comes after him, not clear. And this is how we get into, I wish I could show you, but the situation that Syria is in now, which if you look at, there are a lot of these maps showing who's fighting who. It's getting more and more confusing every day. But it's like, it looks like a quilt or something, like where there's patches all over the place, and each patch represents a group that's in control of certain territory. The result of that, war is very ugly when different groups are fighting each other. It becomes chaotic, and it becomes a dangerous place for civilians to live. So daily life in Syria has basically become impossible no matter where a person happens to be living in. It used to be that there were safe pockets. So you know, Syria is about like 1.5 times the size of Pennsylvania. So if you think about a country this big, of course when a war starts, it's not the entire country, it's not every single street. So maybe you live in one town and things are fine and safe, but your friend lives in another town and it's sort of chaotic. So maybe you'll just stay. Maybe you're like, okay, you know, the war's over there. I like staying in my house. I still have my job to go to every day. I'm a student. I'm still at university, and there's no bombs dropping here, so I'm going to stay where I am. But that's becoming a little bit more difficult as the war spreads so much, because 4.5 years, almost 5 years of war, there are fewer and fewer safe places for people to go. And I want to talk just a little bit. I recently did a story about daily life in Syria. This is when all the media attention came out about that little boy who washed up on a beach in Turkey. I talked to my editor about doing a story like this, like maybe I could just call around to people who are still in Syria and just write a story about what is life like. And it was, I mean, even I've been covering this for a while, and even I was really surprised at some of the stories that people told me. And they varied from place to place, but I'll give you one example that was really striking. There's the protests. So now let me backtrack a little bit. You gotta see some of these pictures. I wanna show you. Okay, so that is Damascus, the capital. This is all before the war, just little snapshots. That's also Damascus. It's the capital, not the biggest city, second biggest city. Nice, big, functioning sort of place. Pretty ancient ruins, lots of history. This is Latakia. This is, Syria is mostly Muslim, but there's definitely some religious diversity. There's a decent-sized Christian population. This is the uprising. It really, they grew and grew, and it became like a massive thing. This is in 2011. And I want to point this out, since I'm trying to make connections, it's important to keep these things in mind. The US ambassador to Syria was in the streets with protesters encouraging this, which when we think about the refugee crisis and what responsibility do we have, I think is just an important thing to note. That the United States, it wasn't like we were neutral and did not have a position. We had a position, and the position was, we support you, Syrian people. Go up against your president, we have your back. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. This is the crazy map I was telling you about. Every color is just a different group, and it doesn't even come close to representing all the different groups fighting each other and who's carved out territory where. The pink section is all ISIS, which it looks really big. There's a lot of desert there, so it's not all like cities and stuff, but it's really significant. They did a pretty good job carving out territory there. All the way in the west, you can't see the color very well, but the government is sort of a grayish all the way on the left, Russia decided to get involved and help them out. So now there's even more earthquakes. And then you have rebel is like the greenish color, but there are many rebel groups. So this is not, it's not just like we have one rebel army, it's many rebel armies, so it gets extremely complicated. This is what it looks like when a place is bombed. I know it's so hard to imagine because I mean, what is that like? I've never seen a place except in pictures, but when bombs are dropping on a neighborhood, this is what happens. You can't live there anymore. So when we think about why are these people coming, why are they leaving their country, this is why they're leaving their country, because how do you live in a place like this? And there are still some people who are there. And sometimes people ask, well, why would you stay there? So there's two questions. Why would you leave? And then, oh, I see. Well, then why would you stay? So there's always these two questions. And the why would you stay is also, there are different reasons. Some reasons are, you know, there are people who are doing really good things in Syria right now, really hopeful things. And it's sad to see how horrendous everything is because there are groups of people who are trying to make things work. I told you I was on the phone with the guy who is making emergency water. You can't get water. You need people to come in and do these emergency programs where you can get water, where you can get health care. Because if all the doctors in a country flee, and then you have a medical problem, you're going to die. So there are doctors who are hanging out. There are people who feel like they're needed. There are people who are trying to create civil society organizations and fix their country, even as the war is going on around them. So there are some people who are doing it for a really kind of noble reason, I guess. Other reasons are there are some people who are too sick, are too old, are disabled, do not have a passport, do not have documents, feel tied to a relative who is unable to leave, don't have enough money. There's a whole lot of reasons why people are there, and there are still a lot of people there. Something like 17 million people are still in Syria. So we're panicking over this refugee crisis. Oh my God, all these refugees are gone. Everyone has left the country. Not everyone has left the country. Maybe 4 million have left the country, but there are 17 more million that are still there and are going to continue leaving until there's a solution, until they are able to live in their homes and, you know, not a place like that. So that's also important to keep in mind. Okay. So I talked a little bit about the reasons why people are leaving. I want to add this interesting thing. I was saying that I was doing a story about daily life and I heard some interesting stories. One is that water and electricity, besides the fact that it's in limited supply because of bombs dropping and destroying, you can imagine if there's bombs falling, power lines are impacted, gas lines are impacted, all these things make life more complicated. But on top of this, different rebel groups are using water and electricity as weapons of war. So what this means is, you know, infrastructure is made without wars in mind. You know, it's supposed to be like one big country, we have one big infrastructure system. Now, I'll use New York as an example because I'm not really familiar with anything else, but in New York City, our water comes from upstate New York. There's a big reservoir. I think this is true, and the water comes down, but it's whatever, we're gonna go with it. So let's say a rebel group controls the reservoir and an opposing group is living in New York City. And I'm just a civilian minding my business. And they get into a fight with each other. Maybe someone's launching rockets from New York City into upstate New York, and the rebel group in upstate New York decides they wanna punish the people who are firing the rockets. They turn the water off. 8 million people have no water in New York City, and what do you do? So this is happening on both sides, and it's happening very frequently and for long periods of time. So I spoke to some people in Aleppo who said that they had imagine this, they had no water or electricity for more than a month this summer, with temperatures going above 110 degrees. And this is when emergency relief people came in, but it meant that if you wanted to get water, you'd have to walk miles and miles and fill up a gigantic thing and then bring it home. And it means that people think about, you can't take a shower maybe for a month. You can't, you have to ration your water. Maybe you can't wash your clothes for a really long time. So this is what life is like. And electricity, the whole country is basically in the dark. I saw a really interesting satellite image before and after. if you look at satellite images at night, you could see all the lights flickering in the cities and stuff. If you look at Syria, it is dark. It is completely black because there's no power there. And the only electricity people are using, it comes on a few hours a day, but they're using generators, which means you need fuel, which means that if everyone needs fuel and it's very difficult to transport fuel around a war zone, the prices are astronomical and people can't afford this sort of stuff. So, yes, costs are spiking, security, people are in a war paranoid. Everyone's trying to eavesdrop on you. People are getting arrested by different groups. And I spoke to another guy who, he was I should point out that I don't think that the first option is I'm gonna leave my country. The first option is I'm gonna move to a different city that's a little bit better than my country, because why would you wanna leave your country? Like, you're comfortable here, your family's here, you know this place, so I don't think the first, if war were to come to America, like, it's not gonna come to all of America at once, maybe it would come to, Houston first or something, or New York or whatever. And I don't think that people would be like, oh, I have to move to Canada now. They'd be like, all right, I'm gonna move to a different city in Texas, and I'm gonna hang out for a while because maybe this war is gonna end. And that's what people did. So a lot of times people move 3, 4, 5, 6 times in the country before finally they're like, well, there's no future here, I'm gonna have to leave and figure something else out. So this guy was living in one of the towns where the big protests were going on, and the government basically was looking at that entire city as a bunch of protesters and guilty people and a bunch of terrorists. They like to call them terrorists. So anyone who lived in that town is automatically guilty because that's the place where all this protests and uprising started. This guy wasn't part of it, but when the bombs started falling on his city, he was like, I gotta move somewhere else. So he moved to a government-held city, which was a lot safer. But he realized that everyone there thought that he was a suspect. Everyone thought he was a terrorist. He couldn't rent an apartment. He couldn't find a job. He couldn't do anything. So life became very difficult for him. Eventually, he was able to rent a place at a ridiculous price. And one day, someone came to his house and whisked him away. He doesn't know who they are. They blindfolded him. They brought him to a prison. And they started interrogating him and torturing him with electricity, stretching his body out with ropes, because they wanted him to admit, yes, I supported the revolution, which he didn't. But even if he did support the revolution, this is pretty extreme, that these are the sorts of things that are happening to people. He never wanted to leave Syria, but after a while, he just decided, how can I live in a place like this? And he moved to Turkey. So this is some of the context. I was going to show you this little graphic, which the New York Times did a graphic showing exactly how many people have died. I'm afraid to touch this computer now and change anything. So if you want to go to the New York Times and look up like Syria number of deaths, it's an interactive graphic, which is really powerful. They put little tiny like pencil dots, and they did 1 dot per person who's died in the war, and you just scroll and scroll and scroll, and each dot represents a person. So I thought that was kind of powerful. This was also interesting. The Washington Post went around asking people, why did you leave Syria? And I would like to point out, because my mom, anyway, when I talk to my mom about this stuff, I think I always say, I tell her, okay, I'm in Germany right now, I'm looking at this refugee crisis, and she says, oh my God, it's so terrible what ISIS is doing. And I think that that's sort of right, but not totally right, because I think that everyone's mind is on ISIS, maybe because of the media, maybe it's my fault too, but it's so much more than that. ISIS is it's an important part, but it's a small part of it. And I think that for the most part, if you look at maps of where fighting is happening and where the bombs are dropping and stuff, ISIS kind of, but it's other cities that are facing also really bad problems that we should not forget. So the biggest reason is it's too dangerous to stay. Obviously, this is why people leave war. It's too dangerous to stay. Or my family convinced me to leave, or rebel groups took control of my town. So this, you can find this on the Washington Post. I thought this was an interesting survey. Okay, another question. In Europe is really facing the brunt of this crisis right now, and a lot of people there don't understand, why are they coming to Europe? Like, why would they want to come to Europe when they don't really speak the language often? Wouldn't you want to go, they speak Arabic in a lot of countries around the world, so wouldn't you want to go to an Arabic-speaking country, be a little bit more comfortable? Wouldn't you want to go somewhere that's not so far away? So why Europe? Leave us alone. But the answer is they are. They are overwhelmingly staying close to home. They are not. Look at Europe. It's, was it 7% or something? It's nothing. So most of the refugees fleeing war are in the Middle East or in Turkey. Turkey has the most. They've been very generous. Turkey has basically opened its door. There's 2 million or so refugees in Turkey. Lebanon, Jordan, you'll notice an absence of Gulf countries which have basically shut the door. But it's also important to point out that countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq now has a lot of problems of its own. There are financial problems, so they're not as capable of handling the situation. It's becoming more and more of a burden on these countries. So now, post-overview, the point of journalism is we're supposed to put faces to all of this stuff, so now it's time for faces, so you can meet some people and not just look at statistics. This is Abdullah. He is a baker from Syria, and I met him in Istanbul. What's interesting about this guy is that a lot of people that I meet, they say, I was protesting, my life is at risk. Like, I had to leave Syria because I was part of this in some way. I was an activist. I was a fighter. I did this, I did that. I involved myself in the conflict somehow. This is a man who is just really, truly minding his business. He didn't want any of it. He's not a political guy. And I think about, my dad is always saying to me my entire life, like, stay out of trouble, just mind your business, don't get involved in anything. Like, I think, my sister likes to protest sometimes, and I think that makes him really nervous. And he's like, don't make any problems, why are you protesting? But this guy is someone who is really, really neutral. He just ran a bakery, and he basically, it was Ramadan, holy month of Ramadan, and his bakery is really, really busy. People are coming to buy pastries and stuff. And he hears on the radio that the war is coming to him, that because the war was happening in this part of the country, he's in this part of the country, and he thinks like, okay, whatever, the war's on that side, I'm fine. But all of a sudden, it really happens, fighting starts, he leaves his bakery, next thing you know, the bakery is bombed, and he stays away for a week or so because things were crazy, and then his friends took pictures and showed him that his entire bakery was looted, like he just bought like a new fridge or something, and like everything's gone. People went in, took everything, it's collapsed. That's his entire lifeline. He has a family to support, and now he has no business. He has nothing. Plus he has debt because he invested in that business and has absolutely no money now. So he left and he tried to go first to Jordan and tried to start his business there, but it was way too difficult. He couldn't do it. He wound up in Istanbul, where this was kind of a cute story. He met 2 of his competitors. They were like fierce bakery competitors, and they decided to join forces and open their own bakery together, which I thought was very nice. But because they were able to pool their money, they were able to open this bakery, and now they're doing that. However, I should also point out that it's one thing to own a business, to be a refugee or an immigrant or a foreigner in Turkey and open a business versus trying to just get a job. Turkey does not have clear pathways for refugees. They don't have an obligation to resettle them and have them permanently stay in Turkey, so it's kind of a shaky thing. They're welcome there as guests, but they're clearly guests, and if Turkey changes its mind and decides guest time is over, they're really at the mercy of the Turkish government, so there's a lot of insecurity. People feel like maybe I shouldn't, maybe there are better places for me to go. This is Sana, she's 8, and her little brother Time, who's 3 months old. She was born in Syria, but then the war started and her parents moved her to Turkey, and then her little brother was born. And in the United States, if you're a baby born in this country, you get citizenship. It doesn't work that way elsewhere. So in Turkey, he's born there. But he doesn't have a Turkish passport because the laws are different there. So just because he was born there doesn't mean that he's a Turkish citizen. And he is not a Syrian citizen, so he's not a citizen. He doesn't have a passport. And if you think about what is citizenship, who cares? It's something that I think a lot of us take for granted. Like we can get a passport, we can get a job, we can have a social security number, but this kid is going to be in trouble. So these are some of the sorts of problems that are happening. Okay, so people are moving to Europe, and they're not buying a plane ticket to do this, there's no legal way to do this. So the only option is to do it illegally, and this is the way that they're doing it. This is a picture, this guy, his name is Abdo, he's my friend's friend, and he was living in Turkey for a while, decided like he needed something better. Europe actually has laws that give, there are pathways for people to get residence permits and work permits and to study, and the quality of life is just better than it is in other countries. So he decides, I've had enough waiting, this war's been going on for 4 years, I have to move on with my life. So he decides he wants to go to Europe, and he goes in the belly of this ship, which is how, for a long time, this isn't happening so much anymore, but you can see that this is an really old ship, and this is like the belly of it. They fill people into it until it's full. So he was actually, they wait until it's full, and they have to do it in a kind of sneaky way. So they have this ship out in international waters, and the people get into smaller boats, and the boats come out and take them to the larger boat, and wait until it's full. When it's full, they head out to Europe and dump the people there. So he brought his family into this, and they had to wait there for 10 days until the boat was full. So he was living in this dark, ship until it was full, and then they wound up taking off. And he's very lucky that he made it alive, because 2 days later, a similar boat went and it sunk. And hundreds of people died. You could imagine that if this ship goes down, every one of these people who's stuck on the inside, they're not on the top of the boat, they're in the bottom of the boat, are going to drown. So he was super lucky, and he made it. This is as the boat was filling up, so you can get a better sense of, you could see that it's wood, you could see that everyone's just kind of sitting on the floor there. And this is him upon arrival. This actually was one of the famous cases. It's called the Blue Sky M. If you guys remember from the news, there was a brief news cycle about ghost ships. This was one of the ghost ships, and what that means is that the captains would abandon ship and basically get you as close to Europe as possible, but they don't want to get in trouble because they're smugglers, they're human smugglers, they'll get in trouble if they're caught. So what they do is they kind of put the boat on autopilot, they jump off, and the boat sort of just continues. They call it a ghost ship, and then it's up to the Coast Guard or whoever is out there to respond, to come in and save their life, because there's no driver, there's no one driving the ship. So this was a really big thing in the news, and he was one of the guys who was on that ghost ship. This is another one of these boats, and I should point out, since we're talking about how global this stuff is and how it affects everybody, the shipping industry, oddly, is getting very involved in these rescues. We need ships to bring stuff from point A to point B, and the Mediterranean is a place where a lot of ships travel, just sort of minding their business and doing deliveries, and more and more and more ships are being called to rescue boats like this that are sinking. So I spoke to a captain of a grain ship. He was carrying grain from Latvia to somewhere in the Middle East, and in the middle of doing this delivery, he gets a distress call saying, there's a boat that's going to sink and you need to rescue all of them. All of a sudden, it's the captain, a commercial shipping captain, it's his responsibility to deal with this massive humanitarian crisis. So everybody's being affected, businesses are being affected, even a cruise ship I saw was being affected. It was a Holy Land cruise going to Israel, I guess, and in the middle of the cruise, everyone who paid money to go on the cruise ship all of a sudden has to do a rescue operation like this. So it's becoming something that everybody is dealing with. Okay, so once they actually get to Europe, a lot of people expect life's going to be good, everything's going to be, the worst is behind me, but unfortunately, it's not always that way, and the response of a lot of governments is to just stop coming, stop. So they're putting fences up, they're putting walls up, they're just trying to make it less possible for people to come, but when there's so much, I showed you the pictures of those war zones. If you're in that much of a desperate situation, you will do anything. And trust me, a lot of people don't want to come to put their life at risk and go on one of these ships. They're doing it because they absolutely have to. And by the way, it is exorbitant. It costs $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 per person to get smuggled, just right across the water. But they get there, and a lot of times there's resistance, there's xenophobia, there's a lot of fears of Islam. These are mostly Muslim people who are coming, and people are extremely nervous about this, and especially in a place like Europe where there's not so much of a history of immigration like there is in the United States, there's so much fear of the unknown, and that's playing out in really ugly ways. So, a couple bad examples and then a couple like nicer examples. But this guy, his name is Ali, he's 16 years old, and he had a ridiculous story. He walked with his entire family, he walked from Turkey to Bulgaria. It took him a really, really long time. It was really difficult, and his first night in Sofia, Bulgaria, someone puts a knife in his back. He gets stabbed the very first night that he arrives in Sofia. And he's okay, but could you imagine how horrifying that is? Like, you're like, I'm going to Europe so my life can be saved. And he was like, I can't believe I escaped a war zone and I never got stabbed or hurt, and I arrive in Europe and someone stabs me my very first night here. So the situation in Bulgaria is particularly bad because, like I said, they're the poorest EU country, and there's a lot of fear that these people are going to cost too much money, they're going to take our jobs, and there are some politicians, unfortunately, who are kind of spewing this hate, and on the radio, people saying things like, we have to fear these people, they're really dangerous, and apparently this is being reflected on the street because he was not the only one to be stabbed. There were a lot of people. I went there to report the story about a lot of people who were getting beat up on the street, basically. In Germany and in other cities, it's playing out in other ways. So this is a group that's called Pegida, maybe you've heard of it. It stands for the Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamization of the West. They'll get mad at you if you say you're anti-Islam. They say, no, we're not anti-Islam, we're against the Islamization of the West. We like to be a Christian continent, we don't want to have, Islam mix in. So they've been having these street protests, and it sort of died down, but this is a protest that I went to. This is in Dresden, this is in Germany, and it wasn't all hate, it was a lot of just fear. Like, we don't know what this means, and we're upset about this. Now, okay, I wanted to make a point before I went here. So, Germany, on the other hand, I want to point out some positive things. Even in Bulgaria, there are people who are doing really inspiring, amazing things, and Germany has really opened its doors, taking in 800,000 this year alone, and a lot of people think the number is going to be a lot bigger, maybe 1 million this year alone. And just, let's take a moment and look at this, that the United States so far, this was in the New York Times just last month, I think, has taken in very, very, very few. And now, after Germany opened its door, I think there was a little bit of pressure on the US to do more than it has been. So now President Obama is saying that the number is going to be bumped to 10,000. But even that, if you think about 10,000 compared to 2 million in Turkey and 800,000, possibly 1 million in Germany, it's a bit of a drop in the bucket. And also, the war is going to continue, and like I said, there's 17 million people still inside Syria, and I bet that they're not all going to want to hang out as their country continues to, deteriorate. Just a couple final things. I want to talk a little bit about terrorism because I think that this always comes up. People are extremely afraid of ISIS and afraid of terrorism, and a big reason why a lot of people say we wish we could, but we can't help all of these Syrians is because what if an ISIS fighter slips in? What if they plan an attack? And when I hear that, I want to point out two things. Number one, ISIS's priority by far is not the United States at this moment. Maybe, not to say that they love the United States and stuff and wouldn't like to carry out an attack, but the countries that are most at risk are near Syria. So people in Turkey should maybe be more worried. People in Iraq certainly should be worried. ISIS is in Iraq. The Middle East, they've seen attacks in Tunisia, in Libya, in Egypt, even in Yemen. So their focus is on building out what they already have in that region. So anyway, this is one point to make, that the United States is not the focus of ISIS. They have their hands full right now, plus they're getting bombed. They're under a lot of stress. So I think that sometimes this fear of ISIS is really overblown at the expense of people who really, really need help right now. Number two, you know, I saw an op-ed in the New York Times that maybe seems really radical, but I read it twice, and after reading it twice, I was like, actually, this isn't so radical. This seems kind of logical. And the title of it was, why don't we let refugees fly in airplanes to Europe, which is like a crazy thing when you first think about it. But then I'm thinking about it, and the argument in the article says, you know, all of these people, we're forcing them to come in ridiculous ways. We're forcing them, you have to walk to Europe. You have to take a boat and get paid $6,000 to get smuggled to Europe. And what happens is, I saw this in Germany when I was just there, you have this, okay, they arrive and there's just a mass of people. You don't know who they are. And at that moment, you have to start this long process of, okay, who are you? Where did you come from? What is your history? If we just accepted that we're having a global refugee crisis and could do that processing at the jump-off points like in Turkey and Northern Africa, and give them not only the safety but the dignity of traveling in an orderly way to countries, then at least we would have processed all these people and we wouldn't have a mass of unknown people. So this is something that I don't think will ever happen, but it's an interesting idea, and it makes the point that, you know, if anything, if there's any sort of ISIS activity, people slipping through, it's because of the chaotic system. It's not, you know, anyway, these are my final points here, and I wanted to end on, I hope, maybe like a sort of uplifting note, but I like this cartoon. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but this is the point, right? Like, I think that we have to think always about, if we're in trouble one day, like, who's gonna help us out? You know, these are people, a lot of them have become my friends, being in Turkey for so long, and you know, they're people. They're just people. They're normal people like us who had jobs and who just don't want anything special. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And if this is a topic that interests you, I encourage you to follow. The Guardian newspaper has done a very cool thing. They made a refugee correspondent, and this guy, he's been doing fantastic work. His name is Patrick Kingsley. He's on Twitter. He's tweeting. He's literally like on the road, traveling with refugees through like all these different train stations and buses and through like 1 million countries, and he's brilliant. So I recommend that you follow him on Twitter or check him out if you're interested. So thank you guys.
I want to say you're welcome to stay and speak with Emily afterward if you like, but we have some time for some questions. If you have any particular questions, we have a few minutes for that. If you'd like to ask Emily anything.
Hi. You touched a little bit about this in your discussion, but I'm sure, as you know, there are probably quite a few citizens in the U.S. that are going to ask the question, how does this subject pertain to us? Why does this impact us?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about why it's so important for us to be educated on some of this subject?
Yeah, okay. So I would say this matters for two reasons. First of all, we live in a democracy. We thankfully have the power to influence politicians either by pushing them to do something or by voting for people who we think will do the right thing. So it's important that we decide, first of all, for ourselves, what is the right thing, and you can't make that decision without knowing all the facts. And then, like I saw in Germany that, which is also a democracy, where people there was a movement. I talked about the xenophobia, but there was also a movement for like, we have to help, we have to do more, and politicians respond to this sort of pressure. So I would say that's a reason, and whether you like it or not, Syrians might begin showing up here in the United States as they're resettled, and they could become your neighbors. So it's important to know where they're coming from and who they are and why they're here in the first place.
Question here?
I would say thank you
My question is, I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about the history and failure of U.S. foreign policy in Syria and how and why it's turned out the way it is today in regards to maybe arming groups to how to deal with refugees and things like that.
Yeah.
Something I think we miss, especially P22, that's something I miss out on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I should preface this by saying that this is not like completely my specialty, but I can give a general answer to this. I mean, and this is my opinion, just based on what I've heard from a lot of Syrians that I've spoken to. The United States, like I said, was really encouraging the uprising. And I think that, my opinion is that the United States should have been really clear. I think there's good arguments for why we should have gotten involved, and there are good arguments for why we should not have gotten involved. But I think being clear, one or the other, would have made a really big difference. But I think there was confusion. People were misled. They thought, well, here's the ambassador in the street protesting with us. Let's go for it, because the United States, the gigantic United States, has our back. And we kind of did, kind of didn't. And I think that ambiguity was problematic. And I wonder, would people have gone as hard with this revolution if they knew from the beginning that the United States was like, this is not something we're going to touch, we're sorry, but you're on your own for this. So that's my basic opinion about that.
Question here? Yep.
What advice would you give to college students who want to career in where do you see this going in the next 5 to 10 years? What would be students?
Yeah. I wish that I was more aware of this when I was a student. Like, I'm still learning a little bit more about this, but there are many humanitarian organizations that do internship programs. So I would have an eye out for that. And even on the local level, there are refugee resettlement programs happening all around the United States, and that's, I think, a great place to get started. And I think there's so much need there. When people come, to a new country and have to start, it's a scary thing. And to have people like welcoming you and helping you when you come, I think is huge. And I think that would be like a really good place to start.
Question here?
Thank you very much for sharing with us this information. Saudi Arabia is claiming that it's housing more than 2 million refugees. Have you came across any information that makes support or reject this?
I don't buy that. I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, there are Syrians, I think, who are maybe have work visas, but I mean, Saudi Arabia just generally is not super. Yeah, I don't think that's true. I've never heard that. I haven't seen anything about that. So.
Maybe one more question? Well, oh, here?
So I was in the UK and after the rhetoric was very evident where you did these major aims and that I was thinking intrigued by using the rhetoric was quite anti-that. Was when the images of the Syrian boy watching from Turkey. And I took a look at Guardian and Times and the Memorial Times. There's a huge change in rhetoric. Has that rhetoric, has that rhetoric actually substitute change in policy, or is it right now mostly change in rhetoric?
Well, I think that there was this change, and I'm more familiar with Germany than I am with the UK. But overall, I think that this photograph was very powerful, and all of a sudden, people were even. I think it crossed the ocean, and even in the United States, there was a little bit more of an openness to host refugees and stuff. But on the other hand, now as it's becoming more of a reality, and you see in Germany in particular this influx of people not stopping, it's turning again, and people are saying, "Whoa, can we even handle this financially?" And so it's sort of a mixed opinion now.
Well, I'd like everyone, if we could give a round of applause for Emily and thank her again. Again, you're welcome to share refreshments with us. And again, if you have questions or want to talk with Emily afterwards, certainly we'll be here. Thank you very much again
Thank
for
you.
coming.